What I kind of want to do now is to look at it from the perspective of tax analysts. And we are somewhat insulated in many ways because we are almost always requesting from a single agency or from a single type of agency. So we're always looking at a taxing authority when we're getting our documents. And I think that puts a slightly different lens on. I have learned a lot from listening to both of you guys. On FOIA is that there is a definite sense, certainly at the federal level, and I've found it quite strong at the state level as well, that providing a requester with the documents is somehow going to affect their ability to collect the maximum amount of revenue. And so that's really the push and pull that we're always struggling with. So I kind of want to go through some of the challenges that we've seen at the IRS. Tax Analysts has an incredibly rich history of making FOIA requests, of using FOIA, developing the law around some exemptions that could be used. And then look at the state level as well, because the states, all 50 states have a public records type law. Some mimic FOIA very closely, some don't. And so we see different challenges depending on the state. So, to start with the IRS, we routinely have a lot of FOIA requests going. The IRS can be responsive, they cannot. It kind of depends on the day and the type of document that we're getting. TIGTA released a September 2016 report in which it said that, there's still quite a lot of concern over the inadvertent release of confidential taxpayer information. That has gone down slightly. It's still not gone away, and I know that's something that the taxing agencies are always very sensitive to, is if they give up this document, are they giving up someone's confidential taxpayer information? And they're very tight about that. Tax Analyst has never requested anything, nor does it seek confidential taxpayer information. We're always looking for guidance. We're looking for what the internal working law would be. So we're never actually looking for taxpayer information. But the TIGTA report also indicated that the IRS may have improperly withheld information in 12% of its cases, which is quite a large amount. And I suspect that if, I'm not sure how they came up with the 12% number. I know that we at Tax Analysts would probably feel it's quite a bit higher than that. We sort of feel like we're always being told no. And the other thing that we constantly fight with, in 2007, we litigated a case, and it was the 2-hour rule. And so the IRS said that anything that took less than 2 hours to prepare was not subject to disclosure under 6110. And it was it was just absurd. They couldn't point to any law that substantiated that. So we took that to court. But kind of since 2007, if you look at the stats on it, you're slowly seeing a decrease in the number of written guidance that's coming out. And so our reporters are constantly looking for what's the other type of guidance? What else are they releasing? If they're not going to release PLRs, are they sending things in email and saying that can't be withheld? So our reporters are constantly looking and trying to figure out how to craft that FOIA request that gets the documents that may be being withheld. And so we've also, in probably the last 3 years, we've really stepped up our game at the state level. I've kind of spearheaded that, and it's been a lot of fun. So like I said, all 50 states have a public records law. Some of the states actually predate FOIA. So those that don't predate FOIA tend to closely mimic FOIA. Those that do predate FOIA are similar, but have decided differences. Some of the differences we find, there's a lot more exemptions at the state level than there are at the federal level, though they tend to be applied more narrowly. And I think if you look at things like the privacy exemption at the federal level, it's pretty broad. It's going to encompass a lot of documents. It's much more narrow at the state level. The balancing test tends to fall on the side of disclosure. I do think, just sort of as an aside, you see so many more of the sunshine type websites and things at the state level, and almost all the states now are trying to do something where you can find budget information. They're doing things for open government. There's more of a sense of open government. Now, in terms of the specific tax guidance that we tend to be looking for, you're not ever going to find that on an open government type website. So we're a little bit different. But I do think that there is a broader sense of disclosure at the state level. And one other little that we've just started to get into now, having Tax Analysts has now filed 2 state-level lawsuits related to denied FOIA requests. All of the case law that has been developed at the federal level does not apply at the state level. It may provide state courts with some level of guidance, but it is certainly not precedential. So we're really having to you have to go back, and you can say, well, this federal court said this, and then we have to look for state law that is, it's sort of recreating the wheel in a lot of ways. So I wanted to go through a couple specific challenges that we face when requesting documents from taxing agencies, and some of these apply both at the state and at the federal level. I'll try to give an emphasis to the state level because you all have covered the federal level pretty well and probably have a much broader knowledge on that than I do. But I guess one of the biggest things that we constantly run into is that when we're requesting documents, the tax authority will come back and say that document contains confidential taxpayer information. We often struggle with that, in terms of, there are times when it probably does. If we're looking for something that is similar to a private letter ruling at the federal level, there will be taxpayer information. The IRS does a fantastic job of redacting. We get a drop of PLRs every Friday. They're all redacted. We put them up on our website. The states have said it is too difficult to redact. It is too cumbersome. They would be unable to completely mask a taxpayer. So there are a lot of reasons that we have received for why they simply cannot redact. I tend not to believe any of them because I feel like many states do. They're successfully able to take out the taxpayer name, take out the taxpayer ID. They even go so far as to take out the tax amount. So I struggle with that one a lot. And then there are the other occasions where we find that this happened very recently. I was requesting an audit manual, field audit manual, which should basically just give sort of the procedure for how an audit is going to run through. And the Georgia Department of Revenue said that their audit manual contained confidential taxpayer information. And that's one where you get it and you say, well, that is absurd. And if it does, then you really need to get it out of there because you're going to be handing that to all of your auditors across the board. They don't need that. They have no need for that information then. So we get these types of exemptions. And I think that at the state level, they get much fewer FOIA type requests. And that's an easy one. And they can put it in there. They can send the request back. They've done it in the time that is required. And they can move on. So we're constantly having to look for those and fight those. And I went back and they're like, oh yeah, it really didn't. And so here's your document. And so, but a lot of it is a give and take. It requires the phone call to say, are you really sure is that what you really meant? So we fight with that on a regular basis. The interagency memorandum is a big one for us, particularly at the state level. We have had a lot of documents withheld on the basis that it is a deliberative process. Now, the one thing, again, we struggle with that is that, going back to looking at the audit manuals that we've been trying to request, it's a final document. There's really no deliberation that is going on in that. So we recently filed a lawsuit in Maryland, and they got a hold of it and said, oh, yeah, that is a final document. Here you go. Here's your document. There was really no reason for us to withhold it. A lot of these, and I was thinking about it yesterday in preparation for this, we are extraordinarily lucky at Tax Analysts we have a very good lawyer that I have on speed dial, I feel like. Chris has been incredibly supportive, that we're able to take these one step farther, and we're able to file the appeals and to file the lawsuits, and we're willing to take the time to get it. A lot of these, like all the audit manuals that I'm trying to get are not, it's certainly a long-term story. It is not something that I'm trying to get for a reporter on a deadline. So that's been this is another one, and you mentioned it. It's the trade secret. And now I have struggled with this because in my mind, a trade secret is not something, a government doesn't have a trade secret. That is a business that has a trade secret. So we have gotten responses back from both the IRS and from state departments of revenue that something in a document is somehow a trade secret or proprietary to them, which I feel like on its face is just absurd, because there's nothing that is in fact trade secret to the government. So I think that's another one where you can look at it at the state level and say, well, that's probably a misunderstanding of what they really meant, deliberative process, and they ended up with that this is somehow proprietary. But we're also looking at we can obtain documents, and we had one, I was trying to obtain a form from California, and they said, well, you can have the form, but if you want the macro behind the form, you can't have that. And, of course, like the red flags go off, like, oh, I didn't know there was a macro, now I totally want that. But I think it is, they need to understand what we are requesting, and we were, in fact, requesting the document. We were not requesting the software, the methodology that goes behind it. It was simply the actual document. Though I still want that macro because that would be so great, but I'm not going to get it, and I understand that. So I think at the state level there is, and maybe it may just be at taxing agencies, but as we ask for more documents, I think that there will have to be some training and education that goes along with what they are required to give us, what they can withhold, how to properly redact, and a lot of those things. We find, we'll get documents that you get a cover page and you have 50 pages that are black. And that's not actually producing a document. And so I'd rather have them deny the document so then we can have a discussion about what we're going to get before you get back. We've gotten back hundreds of pages of black in response to a request. And that's where you really wish they would have just said no, so then we could have gone and filed the appeal and done that. So I think that there is some sense at the state level that they need to be educated on how the whole process works and how the process could work better and to their benefit as well as to our benefit. We also frequently at the state level deal with simply a failure to respond. They don't respond, and you can go through their statutes and say, well, is it a deemed denial? Did they, 30 days has passed, and there's nothing to that either. And then you're kind of left in this, like, okay, well, I'll try again. And then, we've gone and like, okay, well, we'll just file a lawsuit because we don't have anything to go on. And that one I find is particularly frustrating. And there is no, for any individual state, there is no ombudsman, which I can't pronounce this morning.
DC has one.
DC has one. Oh, you're actually right. There are a few.
There are.
And so to that, we also have issues in several states that you do, in fact, have to be a citizen of the state, which is a very frustrating one, even for press. Like Virginia, Virginia has a law that says you need to be a citizen, but there is an exemption for press. So we could ask for documents. I had a reporter requesting some documents from Arkansas, and the press officer was quite smug about, well, you can't. So sorry, you're not from Arkansas. You're not going to get those documents. And that is really frustrating for reporters, particularly so much of what we do here, and I suspect so much of what many of the financial type reporters do is it's a multi-state environment. It's not, what she was trying to do was to create a document that looked at all 50 states and what they had, and so that was incredibly frustrating. We've had a similar in Alabama. We'll file the FOIA. We know they'll deny it and they'll say we're not a citizen, and so that has been quite challenging. We have also twice now in the last month had a question as to whether or not our request, even though we're press, whether our request was for commercial use. So that's a big one for the states. They want to deny us on that. We're seeing a lot of fees, even for press, where we always put in that we are press and we would like the fee waived. We're seeing more and more fees being assessed. I suspect in a hope that, I had one and it was nearing like the $1,000 mark, and that is kind of the point where you think like, how much do I care about this story? Is this? And sometimes when you're going in and you don't know exactly how good is the document going to be, is it really going to be the basis of a terrific story? How much do I spend? So that will at some point become problematic for us. And last, I think one of the great difficulties, and you both mentioned it, for our reporters is trying to accurately describe a document. It is really, really tough. Some documents we're quite clear on, but as I was mentioning earlier, with the, you sort of see a decline in private letter rulings at the IRS. So now if we get a tip that there's something else out there, we need to be so specific in trying to come up, what is that document titled? We were looking for white papers at one point. And as it turns out, each division within the IRS called their white paper something different. So what worked for one group wasn't going to work for the next. And so we had to, it takes a lot of time and effort to go in and figure out, and you almost can't just describe it. We tried initially saying white papers, and then we gave 12, sort of bullet points on what we suspected they were. And we got 2 documents out of it, and then had to go back and say, okay, well that didn't quite work. How else can we do? How else can we describe? But it is incredibly frustrating for reporters, particularly when we're dealing with one specific agency, to then go back and say, okay, well in this it's, these people call it a white paper, and here it's a training manual, and here it's something else. So it's really challenging, and even trying to get audit manuals for all 50 states. I have one state that says they don't have an audit manual, which they do. It's just that, and we've tried, 5 different ways of saying, okay, if you don't, trying to describe like what would you call the training that you provide to your auditors? You clearly provide your auditors with training materials. If you don't, that's a story, and we'll write that, I suppose, at some point. But it is a really difficult and time-consuming task for the reporters to try to figure out how to draft their documents. So with that.